There you go. Hey, you feel better?
I do feel good.
Okay, good. Good morning, everybody. We're going to get started on our workshop for Monday, April 8th. Our first item on the agenda is the economic development update, and I'll turn it over to Matt.
Thank you, Mayor County. Mayor County, members of council, Matt Anderson, Assistant City Manager. I'm going to give you an update on a general update on projects that are under construction or under planning in the city. Some going through the Economic Development Office, some just working their way through the natural permitting process. But we've got a nice list, and then a couple specific projects that I want to give you a primer on, that you're going to have one particularly at tonight's council meeting, and one or two others that are going to be coming up for your consideration at future meetings. I'm going to start off with a few neighborhood projects. These are just kind of scattered around the city. Most of you are aware we've got CVS is entering the market. They have 3 stores in various processes for zoning and permitting right now. Hickman and Merle Hay, 2nd and Euclid, and Southeast 14th and Park. I imagine there'll also be some suburban stores popping up too as they enter Des Moines. MLK and Ingersoll. This was one of the CDBG DR projects that got a lot of attention because it's at MLK and Ingersoll. It's done by Frank Levy, Bob Caluzzi. This is a Viridian Bank project that's going to anchor this. And there's 2 options that we were pursuing for this site with this developer. Since they didn't get the CDBG DR, it was going to get stripped down to be just a 1-story bank on the corner. And we were urged by the City Council to see what we could do to get some more mass on this site and get it back to a mixed-use project. Staff is working with Frank Levy, the developer, to try to trim his numbers and see if we can get this in within budget. And we're feeling pretty good that we think we can, that it's going to be a relative to the CDBG DR pro forma, a relatively small financial gap that we think we can fill and get a much more robust project anchoring that corner.
So what's the timeline on that being resolved?
Viridian's been very cooperative. You know, they were the ones that were kind of driving that timeline. They like the bigger project, so they're being cooperative and they're eager, but they're not aggressively pushing it to do anything that would put this larger project at risk. So Frank's working on his numbers. The ball's kind of in his court right now. He's economic development and community development staff have been having regular contact with Frank and his team. So we think it's going to be a manageable gap. NDC is working on a couple projects. One of them also being a former CDBG DR applicant. One project that's under construction right now at Southeast 6th and Hartford, will be completed early summer. This is a project that's kitty corner from the B&B Deli, B&B Grocery. That's a mixed-use project, market rate housing on the top level, and some small commercial and restaurant bays on the street level. And then Indianola and Dunham is a city-owned site, and it's excess right-of-way from the Indianola extension, Indianola construction. And it has some environmental contamination issues on that site that we've been working with a previous developer about 5 or 6 years ago. This was a project that did not get CDBG DR allocation, but NDC is planning to move forward with the project anyway. So they're working with real estate on acquisition of the site. And I think what they're going to do financially, since they didn't get the CDBG money, is they're going to phase the project. They had one larger building that was going to go on the site. They're going to shrink it down to two-phase project so that they can fit that into their annual financials. And it's going to be a nice project. So they're going to go back through the design so they can do the 2-phasing. But that's going to be coming up for your consideration shortly also, as real estate and economic development work with them on the acquisition of this site. Aldi's planning a store at Southeast 6th, or excuse me, at Southeast 14th north of Deal, near the Come and Go. We don't talk a whole lot about manufacturing projects. Not a lot come through the city, at least through economic development. Here's one. It's at the former Molly Filter building. I remember Mr. Clark and I toured this building, I believe, years ago when Molly Filter was leaving. This is on McKinley, just north of the airport. This is a $2.5 million production facility for glass and metal architectural panels, and bringing some jobs to the area. PDM Precast on East Granger. They're doing an office, warehouse, and production expansion. The Shops at Douglas, this is a retail strip just west of Merle Hay on Douglas. That's the former Firestone repair facility. And I know that Mr. Eichner is working on getting I don't know if they've been announced, but we've seen some preliminary indications of a couple of retail tenants going in there. And then announced a few weeks ago were all of our low-income housing tax credit awards. Mr. Conlon received 2. Common Bond has Bloomsbury Village just east of here. Hubble received 2, Broadway Heights and Melbourne. And Newberry Development, which is Frank Levy again, doing a rehab of the Lagudi Towers, 139 units. So all great projects. There were 12 projects awarded statewide, and Des Moines got 6 of them. So a lot of great construction activity in the neighborhoods for those projects.
Lagudi Towers now, had they not, I thought they had received credits previously.
That was Elsie Mason Manor.
Elsie Mason.
Yep, so they're doing both.
Okay. Do they have the litigation resolved?
I don't know. We can find out.
Okay.
I can ask Frank.
Matt, the shops on Douglas, is that in Des Moines or Urbandale?
That's in Des Moines. It's in Des Moines. You have to go another couple blocks and then you'll get into Urbandale.
Do they have the?
Because, you know, half of Merle Hay Mall is in
Yep.
Urbandale, so it must jog around that Firestone.
Yeah, the Firestone is a little bit it's a little bit east, so it's within the Des Moines city limits.
Okay.
There are 2 RFQ processes that are in the works right now for 2 downtown projects. One is an event center hotel. Many of you are aware that the Des Moines Redevelopment Company bought the former Allied building just south of Vets, and the DCA, Convention and Visitors Bureau, Polk County, and city staff, we've been working together on a process to draft an RFQ. The RFQ is a request for qualifications. It's really just a first step in the process of trying to find qualified developers who would be interested in pursuing a project. It's not as firm and committed as an RFP, and an RFP where you get very specific on what you're looking for and what the timeline is and how the financing looks like. RFQ is really a feeling out process to find developers that have the horsepower to do a project like this and are interested in coming to Des Moines. So that RFQ hit the streets last Monday. The DCA sent that out. It was sent locally to local developers, local hoteliers, the local brokerage community, architecture community, and then nationwide to convention-style hotel developers. The convention-style hotel market's a little different. Not everybody specializes in that. It's quite a specialty. So we've been seeking outside developers that may have an interest in it, and we're receiving a lot of interest. Des Moines is on a lot of people's radar for hotel development. We're seen as an underserved market, so I think we're going to get some good qualified groups coming in. So the RFQ went out for this on May 15th, on last week. Submittals are due May 15th. That will then segue into a more formal RFP process. When you've got it to the top 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 developers that you think can get it done, you bring them back into the fold, and then you're working just directly with them on what their proposal is, what their flag is, what their architecture looks like, how they would answer some important things like skywalks and parking. And the RFP is where we'll get more specific on that, and then that's when we'll really start to have a better idea of what the financial situation looks like too. The second RFQ process that we have underway, this one being city-driven, is the 7th Grand Parking Garage. That we've accelerated that as to meet principal's timeline. We have a staff team. It's half the departments in the city almost that are going to be working on this. It's a very big, important project. This is probably a $50+ million deal that is important that we get this right. Aaron Olson Douglas and I are the project leads on this, and we've seen significant developer interest since the register picked up on this as part of the principal project, both local and around the Midwest. We're getting a lot of people just picking up the phone randomly and introducing themselves to us, and so we're excited that we're going to get some good teams as part of this process. Really a similar process to what we're going through with the Event Center Hotel, an RFQ that we will bring to you to review and then ultimately vote on, and probably I'll present it at a workshop in May and then be asking you to vote in May or around the June 1st to distribute that RFQ. Same process. We've had a lot of local interest and a lot of Midwest interest, and we'll cast a very wide net with this so that we find the best teams. What we're going to look for and ask for is a public-private partnership. There's a definite public component to this with the parking, and so we need to find someone that's going to be a really good partner, because we're going to have to go through all of this together. It's not just handing off a piece of land and having a developer go develop a private building. So this one, because of its importance in the core, because of the importance to the Ruan Centers and the Marriott, the Principal, and 801 Grand, and all those tenants, we need to make sure it's done right, that the timing's coordinated with Principal. And so this will be coming through your system in the next 6 weeks or so.
Could you go back over to the Event Center
Yep.
Hotel? Based upon what you said on 7th and Grand with the parking being critical, is there any indication in the RFQ regarding park and ride? And is that are you opening that up?
We are definitely opening that up. Every developer that I've talked to, I push that, because we have an asset sitting there a block away, and it doesn't make any sense to build a new parking garage if we can tap onto that asset. And at a minimum for, in my mind, at a minimum for employee parking, you're going to have 100 employees at a convention hotel working each shift, and valet parking. And we've talked about, are there ways you could improve the streetscape on Center Street and even up north on Crocker to make it feel better for people to use that for events, better lighting, banners, planters, really make it a nice pedestrian experience, going short of trying to do a skywalk across that far.
So the dollar amount, just a range on the Event Center Hotel, you said 50?
It's at least, it's a $100 million project, 120. It's, what we've spec'd is approximately 450 rooms. That's what we feel that anything short of that would probably be, really wouldn't be worth pursuing. It wouldn't solve our problems. Mr. Coleman may have some insight into that, but we'd rather do it right and not fall short.
The only insight I'd have is that the CVB tracks lost business, groups that we're trying to bring to town, and there's clearly a trend that the organizations that decide not to come here, it's because there's not a well-connected, large enough hotel of the size that Matt describes. And if we build something 50 or 75% towards that, it's not going to attract any of them. Either we're in the game or we're not,
right,
in terms of recruiting them. So I agree with you that going halfway or 75% the way there doesn't solve a problem. It would be nice to have in town, but I think what we're really trying to do is solve a problem here, and that doesn't solve it.
Right. Okay. I'm pushing my time limit here, so I'm going to speed this up a little bit. On your agenda this morning, or on your agenda tonight, you have a preliminary terms of agreement on the Randolph Hotel project that Rick and I have been working on for 7 or 8 years, trying to attract developers, and we've talked to some good ones, and we've worked through some pro formas of some good developers, and we have not been able to fill the financial gap. We have some stars aligning finally on the Randolph and its 2 adjacent buildings, so really it's kind of 3 projects in one. Sherman Associates is the developer. Most of you are familiar with George Sherman and Jackie Nicholas. They've done some great things just south of Court Avenue with their 3 projects there. This project is 55 units, 7,500 square feet of commercial space on the ground level. I'm going to pause on this slide real quick. I've been talking to George and Jackie over the weekend, and they are considering the opportunity to do market rate housing, 100% market rate housing. Looking at the financing that's available, they're working with their lender and through their numbers to see if they can make that project work as 100% market. So it's going to be presented to you as an affordable kind of as the base case, but I wanted to let you know there may be an opportunity for this project to go market rate, and we'll keep you updated if that changes, but that is something they're pursuing right now. But as it stands right now, it's proposed to be 100% affordable units, $15 million project. This would be an historic rehab, so it's eligible. It's on the National Register. All 3 buildings are on the National Register. Great architecture. If you haven't just stood across the street and looked at them lately, they're really great looking facades. There's a $2.5 million financial gap. This is similar to the gap we saw with other developers early on when we worked with Harry Bookey and Hubble on the stuff that they did across the street, the new construction and the rehab. They had proposed this as a phase of their project on Howard Avenue, and I believe their gap was in the $3 million range at that time, and we weren't comfortable with that, just couldn't make the numbers work. But as we look at it, we think that this is an important project. I think Ms. Hensley, you said, and then were quoted in the paper over the weekend as saying this was a lost leader, and that is one of those. That's kind of the way we've described it. It's one of those projects that we feel we have to do. We need to save the architecture. We need to improve the housing stock that's there right now, and it'll act as a catalyst to jumpstart things that are around there. The city has a significant investment in the 2+ acre parking lot to the south, and then the 5th and Walnut parking garage site. It'll be torn down in the next year or two. So we have 2 key development parcels, and the ability for this project to spur development on our sites is huge. I think if it stays in its current state, which will probably continue to get worse, really going to put a drag on our ability to go out and market those sites for development, particularly at a price and with the quality of project we'd like to see on those 2 sites. So this is an important catalytic project that we really think the time is to get it done. This last bullet point is very important. There are current residents living in Randolph, as most of you are aware. It's generally, it's deemed as a hotel. It's the Hotel Randolph, but it's short-term housing. Some people stay there for a few days. I think there are probably some people there with much longer tenancy. They really don't enter into a lease, so it does kind of operate more like a hotel. It's again short-term, more transient housing for most of the people that live there. So we think it's extremely important that the city, the developers already proposed this before we even talked to them, and local service agencies partner to make sure that we transition people into safe housing, a good alternative to where they are now. And so there is some relocation money in Sherman Associates budgets to help assist the move. And then we think bringing those social service agencies together is also important. Also important to give them a very long lead time. Don't come in, knock on the door and say you need to be out by the end of the week. Give them months to prepare and months to slowly transition to better housing.
Matt, let me ask a question here. I think we've all had concerns. We've looked at 8,700 families that meet that $11,000 income. I would guess all of these people fit into that category. My guess is they're getting money from someplace because they can pay rent. There's not housing available for a lot of those families, and here's 55 more. We've really got to work hard. I don't even know that we have the capacity to put 55 more families out on the street looking for another place to live. So let's concentrate on that really hard, because there's lots of people in need. Chris?
I totally agree with you, and some of you might remember that there's been members of the faith community down here before when we were considering the Randolph Hotel. I reached out to some of those last Thursday and Friday and shared with them the good news that the city has asked the developer to put together a fund to help with this transition. And I think that isn't nearly enough, but is at least a start. It scares me a lot, and I hope that we can create a flexible timeline so that we can meet this. I think if we, later on our agenda this morning, we have this issue with our Section 8 vouchers and the number of families that the mayor is speaking about. I think if that program was still in place at the same level that it was 6 months ago, we probably could have accommodated this change more rapidly with the attrition in that program and prioritize these residents. But with that program cutting back, it really is very scary to me whether or not we're going to be able to create an alternative. And I'd like this paced so that we're sure that we can meet that.
Okay.
And I would just add to what's been said, Matt, if you recall when the YWCA went through the transition of moving all of their residents, there was a pretty comprehensive group of people that came together, and funds were made available to make sure that there were not any problems and everybody was taken care of. So you might look back at that model as well.
Brian's got a
Yes.
Thanks, Mayor.
question.
First off, I think this is a great plan, and loss leader aspect of it is terrific. Whether it has 55 affordable housing units or 55, I think the benefits to that area, I walked there last night, I walked around the block, is going to be incredible. Do we know how many actual people live there on any given day?
I haven't seen a rent roll. Jackie, do you have a feel?
I saw like 5 of them standing out last night.
I was actually down there last night and saw the same guys.
Jackie Nicholas, Sherman Associates, 233 Park Avenue South, Minneapolis. There is not a rent roll. As Matt said, it does operate as a hotel, so there are no leases. The property manager has gone through and tried to calculate how many people have been there for a day, a week, a month, a year, but it's a very fluid population. That said, most of the rooms are full most nights, so probably in the neighborhood of 80. For the majority, men are there. Like I said, it's very fluid, and they don't keep good records that we can keep a good tally of.
Okay.
What's the rate per night per room?
The weekly rate is $100. So majority of the people do rent on a weekly basis. I'm not sure what the night rate is because most people don't rent by the night, but it's $100 a week, which is $400 a month, which is pretty significant for a very small hotel room, if you think about it.
Thanks, Jay. Anybody?
Okay, we've got another housing project working our way through the system. It's at MLK and Southwest 2nd. This is the former Wellmark warehouse, just south of the Iowa Cubs. Hanson Company is proposing 44 market rate units in this former building. It unfortunately, it's almost a $6 million investment. Unfortunately, it will not qualify for historic tax credits. You guys have seen enough historic tax credit projects. You know that windows are very important in historic tax credits. And this, as a warehouse, doesn't have windows on all the facades. So they have to come in and punch windows in the facade for housing units, which will make it not eligible for historic credits. Much smaller gap on this project, mainly because it's much better shape than the Randolph is. The mechanical systems, the roof, the building shell has been well kept up in corporate conditions by Wellmark. So we have a $500,000 financing gap on these 44 units that Rita Connor in Economic Development is working with Hanson Company on filling. We've been working with Scott Sanders on both of these projects and how these needs can be balanced into the downtown TIF system, and we're confident that they can. Preliminary terms should be coming to you on this project in 30 days. So here we have 55 market rate, 44 market rate, 55 affordable, good balance coming into downtown, 2 great rehab projects. Here's a quick picture of the Randolph restoration. On the left is the Court Avenue facade, which, and I can't remember the name of it, but I love the shorter building to the left of that. And then, again, great architecture on the 4th Street elevation, too. Real quick, East Village Row House. Thanks to everyone's hard work, especially the leadership of the mayor and the city council. It's looking right now like we've saved.
I might also say Matt McCoy.
And Matt McCoy has been tremendous help.
Huge.
Yeah, city, DAS, SHPO, and local developer all got together, sat on the same table, talked it out, figured out a way to get it done, and we think we're going to get it. So right now we're working through a process. The relocation site is a city-owned parking lot on East Grand, kind of that parking lot that's behind Soho, but the far eastern edge of that parking lot by the Lime Lounge. We're trying to figure out exactly how we're going to parcel it off, but that's the proposed site. It needs to go through the city's urban renewal disposition process, which per state law will take some time. But Andrea Hauer in Economic Development and Legal have a good handle on that schedule. An expected move date is mid to late summer. We're working with the state to make sure we balance special events that are going on. You don't want a building up on blocks when Yankee Doodle Pops is going on at the 4th of July. And so we're working with them to make sure that all the schedules are coordinated. And we probably think July, August is probably when you'll see the building relocated. It's a fragile building. We don't want to have to pick it up twice. So we want to make sure that the utilities and the foundation are all ready for it. That's going to take a little time. And so that you can just come set it down. Most of you have seen the gas station still sitting up at the cathedral, up on blocks still. We don't want this sitting up on blocks on East Grand.
They have a nice sign on Cottage Grove, though.
They have a nice sign, you're right.
So tonight, the action on the agenda is to continue the hearing on this.
Continue the hearing. What we'll ultimately have to do is, we believe we'll need a hearing on the certificate of appropriateness for the new site, for it to maintain its landmark status. We're still kind of sorting through that. We figured we'd just leave it on, and as we try to answer some of our own questions, rather than have to take it off and then post another set date of hearing.
What parking lot is this?
On East Grand, there's a parking lot behind, on the north side of Soho.
It's behind Blazing
The Lime
Saddle.
Lounge behind Blazing Saddle.
Yeah, I
and
know
their
where
back
it
door
is,
empties
yeah.
out, right there.
We put asphalt on it a couple
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah, there's just there's some metered
So
spots.
who will own the building?
The building will be owned by the developer. It's the
And then they own the property?
Yes, we're going to sell the property.
Do we have to put the property out for bid to other developers?
That's the urban renewal process we have to go through. So it'll be a developer-initiated process, not unlike we've done for a lot of other projects. And we will put it, that's why it's going to take some time, and we're kind of looking into midsummer, because we have to go through our process basically through May and June to dispose of the property, open it up for 30 days or so, and then see if there's any competing proposals. We're parceling off a very small section of that parking lot. It really just specifically for that footprint and a little circulation of the row house. It's not the whole parking lot. We're going to maintain that for a future development site. And we'll certainly send you the proposed parcel plan and site plan as soon as we get them. We're still working on kind of option A, B, and C and how we want to lay that out.
Okay.
Okay?
I'm skeptical of that lot,
Okay. What part of it?
that's the best use for a lot that we've carried for a long time.
We are laying out a proposal where we're making sure we're not leaving an orphan parcel, if that's what you're concerned about. So we think there's still development. We're making sure we're holding development potential for the remaining westerly portion of that block. I agree with you, Mr. Coleman. We don't want to orphan a prime development site in the East Village. That's part of the reason we had so much trouble with
That's right.
the Tim
And it cost us
Redmond,
a
Jim
lot of
County, and it cost us
money.
a lot because it got too small. Exactly.
The remaining piece is at least as large as 300 East
That's what we're
Grand.
working on.
Is that correct?
We're working on that you could put a building, the footprint of 300 East Grand where Zombie Burger is, on the remaining lot. So I don't have anything I can show you yet right now. We're still working. We just met on Friday afternoon working on those parcel options for the row house. But we think what we're leaving to the west is big enough to get a significant project on.
But if you put a significant project on the parking lot, then you take parking away from the existing users, and you'd have no parking there,
would
which that building has at East 3rd and Grand.
We would have to do underground parking.
Are you open to other sites?
We'd be open to any site. This was, as the process was going on over the last couple of years when the state first RFP'd the row house, developers looked at any sites around the area to put it because of some SHPO requirements on where you can move buildings and how they had to orient to still get tax credits. This was deemed as the best site. We'd be open to any site. The city staff, we're not prescribing this site by any means. This was a natural fit to keep it in the East Village on a piece that we controlled, and there aren't a lot of vacant parking lots.
I think that's going to be a negative for the East Village businesses if you take their parking, some of their
Oh, I
parking
understand.
away, and it's- I
This
would
parking
think they'd
parking
be-
lot, though, is only utilized to the tune of about 30%. It's not a very heavily utilized parking lot. The parking lot we have to the east is full. This parking lot doesn't get as much use as you might think. But I agree. We don't want to hamstring the rest of the businesses in the East Village by taking away their parking.
And then, they hopefully will grow and they'll need additional parking too, so.
I've taken way more than my allotted time on the schedule.
Rick?
So, sure.
Just one thing to say, these are all great comments about that particular property, but a surface parking lot in East Village probably is not your most desirable in use there. So as time goes on and that area is so strong and vital, I expect that surface parking to eventually get structured or moved out to the periphery. This particular property, I think Mr. Coleman's comment at the beginning is right. It seems to me this is one, and Matt's already touched on it, that developing a plan that allows for that lot to be ultimately developed with building is probably the appropriate thing to do. Clearly, the parking is going to have to be addressed one way or the other. Underground is the most expensive way to do it, so we're going to have to look at some other options. But that's just going to continue. It's almost a byproduct of success is the fact that you start to squeeze the parking, and that's what's happening. We're just going to have to be clever to solve that problem.
We need more ramps in the East Village.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Rick, the other piece, I think you've got a couple of experts that have been keen on retail and what works and makes pedestrian-friendly, walkable, retail, residential, commercial neighborhoods. And parking lot, actually a service lot, as you just suggested, is a negative to the further development and use of it, because you come to a parking lot, you go for a block and it's empty. Nobody wants to go on down there to see what's happening a block or two on down the road. Got to figure out how to develop those block faces and make the thing work. And I think we've got some experts coming in as well as staff that have been working really hard on that.
Well, yeah, we look at it as a negative as far as land use and that, but I'm sure the Eastgate Village people look at it as a positive for them to have places for their customers to park.
There has to be a place to park, no question about it.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, let's move on. We've got the MSC update. Discussion of proposed municipal services center, construction contract, add alternatives, flood protection, and budget.
You're doing it?
I'm doing it, yes, indeed. I'm going to try to catch up a little bit of time here. You have an item on the agenda tonight, which is a particularly significant action. It is approval of the construction contract for the Phase 1 of the Municipal Service Center. What I wanted to do this morning was just run through some of the really key background pieces, and I'm going to focus as we go along on a couple things. One is the actions that we've looked at to address the flood protection issues. This is an issue that the mayor has brought to us consistently from the very beginning. I want to make sure that we nail that appropriately. And then the other issue is just looking at the contract itself, what some of the add alternates were, and what our recommendation is before you. So just going back to one of the initial things, why are we doing the project now? What's the real motivating factor for it? I think you all know, but there are a couple things that are really driving the timing for it. One is the Kimmon project. You're familiar with that. They are expanding. It's a wonderful project for the city. Southeast Connector goes by their property. But in order for them to expand, we need to relocate our major public works and parks operations out of that site just to the north of Kimmon. So we have to do that in a timely factor, and that's been one of the things that's driven us to the point we are. Southeast Connector, with great work by the mayor and council and the city, we are getting close to the point where we can award a construction contract on Southeast Connector that will get it past the current Kimmon site over to Southeast 30th. That should happen later this year. So that's a major event that will transform this area. Those two things are really driving a lot of the activities in this area. A couple of the things that once you get to that, you start thinking about are just the wonderful advantages that can accrue to the city from an operating standpoint by consolidating our operations. And the other thing that's absolutely unavoidable in this area, the southeast portion of the city, there's been such a little amount of investment, Kimmon being one of the bright spots, but very little private investment in this area. So this is a way for us to incentivize development in this particular area. Although there is a great sense of urgency here, we did want to make sure that as we went forward, we did it appropriately. So there has been a team of city staff people that have been working over the last 18 months, 2 years, that have looked at the master plan for a municipal service center. And I just want to make sure I recognize the folks that were so involved in that. Larry Halse from my staff has sort of led the charge on it. Jeb Brewer, Pam Cooksey, Pat Gazitza, Phil Delafield, Aaron Olson Douglas, Ben Page, Jill Tenney, and then others on their staffs as well. But this group of folks that I just mentioned has really been the group that has focused on this project and has tried to look at all of the short and long-term strategic issues that we'll face as an organization. Some of the key points and considerations are listed here on this slide. We've looked at all of our city operations. We're looking at consolidation as a way to save money in the future in terms of cost of operation. We're going to look at a project that's implemented in phases because we simply can't consume all of that cost initially. And then there are various considerations that entered into the actual site itself. One of the key things up there, actually two things: minimum site size 40 acres. So you can't do what we're talking about on a small site. You've got to have at least 40 acres to do it. And secondly, we wanted to look for a location that was central to our service area, which is the entire city. So that tends to drive you to look for locations that are in the central part of our community. Here is a map that shows you the entire site. It's in yellow. The Phase 1 project, which is the construction contract tonight, is the piece in the north end. Just to set the stage here, the north street going east and west is Southeast Connector. On the left side of the map is Southeast 15th. The street at the bottom is Maury. On the right is Southeast 18th. Running through kind of the middle, 2/3 of the way up is Scott Avenue, and you can see the railroad track going diagonally. At this point in time, we've essentially purchased the property north of the railroad. The land south of the railroad, that's the diagonal line, is yet to be purchased. But Phase 1 is the building on the north end. The building on the sort of the southeast corner of that is a privately owned. That's the meatpacking facility. We're not planning to acquire that. So this is a map that shows you the Phase 2. So you see the first phase is Parks and Engineering. That's necessary to get them off of the site where Kimmon is going to go. The Public Works is going to be Phase 2, and you can see that showing on this map as well. So just Phase 1 is tonight. Phase 2 would be a future phase of construction. I mentioned at the beginning a couple of the things that we've looked at particularly carefully has been the flood issues that relate to the site. There's a whole series of things that we've built into it. Again, I'm going to give a lot of credit to the mayor who's brought this issue to us from the very beginning. So we have tried really hard to address these issues in the site. A number of things here. The site is protected by a U.S. Army Corps of Engineer levee. It's the same levee, by the way, that protects much of the downtown. The site was evaluated based on the most recent Corps of Engineer data. You might recall the flood flow frequency study, I'll get it straight, that came out in January of 2011 that really set new targets and new elevations for us to meet. So we've tried to build that set of assumptions into this plan as well. The first floor of the building has been raised. If you go out to the site now, you see a great big pile of dirt. That was placed there by a contractor, Corral Contractors. You awarded the contract in September of 12. So the site has been elevated quite substantially so that the first floor of the new building would be 1 foot above the updated 100-year flood level based on those new core data. The building itself will be flood hardened. Now, what does that term mean? We've listed here some of the key features. Mechanical and electrical rooms are on the second floor, not on the first floor in the event that there's water. Conduits for the first floor are routed from the ceiling. First floor electrical outlets 24 inches above the floor, and so on and so forth. Given the parameters of the site and the provisions that have been built into the site, the staff is comfortable that we've addressed the issues on flood mitigation adequately. But beyond that, and again, giving a lot of credit to the mayor and his urgings, we have looked at where do we go from here? How do we even go further down the road in terms of flood protecting the site? And there are 2 or 3 things we can do. One is we move into Phase 2 design. That's the Public Works facility. That's where those operations will take place. We have looked at ways that we can integrate into the site design a dry access to the site. So what you're trying to do here is make sure that you can get to and from the site. The building itself might be protected, but if there's water around, you want to make sure that you can get to the site with the street. So we're trying to look at designs for Phase 2 that would ensure that there is access to the site that's dry. We're also looking at taking additional actions to improve the core levee, which is actually along the north side of the river. Just east of this location, that would afford a higher level of protection, not only to this site, but to the other properties in this area, including Kimmon. And then last but certainly not least, there are actions that we can take to improve the flood management characteristics of the whole Des Moines River Basin. That's an action that would have to be taken with the Corps of Engineers and with the state of Iowa. We intend to do that as well. So those 3 actions, in addition to the initial things I mentioned, are all very important. Okay, looking at the base bid itself, the building has been designed, and the construction contract on your agenda tonight for your review and approval would ensure that the project is LEED certified, possibly silver. There are a number of different provisions. I'm not going to go through them all, but they're listed on the site on this particular slide. You'll notice the very last point. All of those lead items built into the contract for Phase 1, the total bid is $14,828,000. The construction contract, Newman Brothers submitted the low bid. There were 9 bids submitted. And again, the hearing is on your agenda for tonight. By the way, I think, at least I assume others are particularly pleased that Newman is a contractor. They're a local firm. They're a very good contractor. We're really pleased that they won the competition. Last thing I want to talk about are the add alternates in the project. You'll see here the 6 add alternates that were put into the bid document. Again, add alternates work like this. The contractor is asked to provide estimates for each of the add alternates. Then it's up to the council whether those add alternates are actually selected. And usually you do that because you don't know what your bid prices are going to be. So if you get good prices on your add alternates or on your base bid, then you're in a position that you can at least consider these. Of the 6 add alternates that were included in the bid, we're recommending to you 4 of them. The ones at the top of the list here: triple glazing on the windows, LED lights in the shop areas, LED lights in vehicle parking, impermeable pavers. There are 2 add alternates that we're not recommending to you. One is an in-slab snow melt. I know we have lots of people that shovel snow, so we kind of figure we can do that on our own. And then there's a photovoltaic array, which is a solar device that goes on the roof. The bid came in at $1.1 million, and given the fact that our base bid was above estimate to begin with, and the return on investment of this particular investment is quite long-term.
How much photovoltaic were we planning on putting on there, Jeb? Do you remember? 960 panels, each one doing 5?
280 watts each, so about 250 kilowatts of power.
Okay.
If we take all of the add alternates that we recommended, that's a cost of $177,900. The base bid is $14,828,000, so the total award would be just over $15 million.
What was our estimate on what we had budgeted?
Was it 15?
I think we're about $1.5 million over what our estimate was.
So roughly 13.5, is that right?
Correct.
Rick, if we were to raise the building an additional amount so it's above the 500-year flood, how much more would we have to add?
Well, Mr. Moore, we could, and I can have Jeb explain this, but there is a relationship between the elevation of the streets and the elevation of the first floor of the building, and we can't really make it higher without making the building essentially inaccessible to the trucks that have to get into it. So it's difficult to do that. We've got it about as high as we can get it without making the grades too high.
Brian's got...
Going back to my question, how much would we have to add for that building to be above the 500-year floodplain?
Jeff, you want to...
Mayor, members of council, Jeb Burson, engineer. You'd have to add, you were talking a foot above the 500 or just to the 500?
Well, above the a
right
foot
now,
above like we're doing with the 100-year floodplain.
Because right now it's a foot above the anticipated 100. Again, that's not the current 100, that's the 100, assuming that the FEMA adopts the course, flood flow, frequency. It'd be about, to get from the foot above the 100 to the 500 would be about another foot and about maybe 1.5 feet. Of course, if you want to do a foot, that'd be 2.5. Doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're talking about acres and acres, because those, when you go to phase 2, that's projected all the way across. The other thing we have is all the access points. There's a lot of constraints with railroad tracks, existing railroad tracks, and you've got to get back down to grade to meet those. And so all your access points essentially at some point are going to be flooded. And there's kind of a diminishing returns as you keep raising the building. Eventually, what can you get to? How's the building operate? In the master plan site, and I think Pat can address it better, you kind of look at how that building is going to be utilized. Primarily, a lot of those functions are going to be done pre-flood. I mean, we fight the flood. When the waters get high, we're spending all our effort keeping those levees intact, making sure everything works, keeping the city dry. And for I think we do a pretty good job on that. I mean, the Birdland levee, if you think about that one, that wasn't a federally certified levee. These are federally certified levees. They're much higher quality, much more robust. And so that's really those functions. So a lot of those people and equipment are not going to be there during a flood fighting situation. They're going to be out on the levee doing other things across the city.
Where do they keep their resources?
Well, obviously, when they come back at night and things like that, they would be in that facility. But as far as operational planning, if a levee was to fail, we would have those equipment and stuff would not be in that facility. But we do have the opportunity, as we talk about the flood hardening, recovery would go much smoother because really the building, the electrical, and all those things are on the second floor, so they wouldn't be impacted as much during a flood. Brian.
Are you done with your presentation, Rick? Mm-hmm. I want to throw my full support behind it. I think it's wonderful that we're moving. I'd like to move, just to make this statement again, move a lot faster on phase 2 to move Public Works out of the East Village and prime that for some development. I do appreciate the flooding issues, but I think that this is a good area. I think it's going to work well. 2 questions, or 3 questions. 2 questions. Did it flood in 1993? Did it flood in 2008, the area?
Go ahead, Jim.
Those levees remained intact in both the 93 and 2008. Essentially, there's local flooding that you'll get on the roads.
Right.
We are making improvements with our detention basin, and this building and both of those would be well high and dry.
Okay.
Floods.
And then the final question that I have is, what is the time frame for phase 2, Rick? Do you have any time frame in mind to move Public Works out of the East Village?
Mr. Meyer, council members, we don't really have a time frame right now. The cost of phase 2 is upwards of $40 million, I think. And we simply don't have those kind of dollars available to us. But having said that, your direction in the past has been for us to make it a priority. So we continue to do that. We continue to look for possible sources of funding for it. And one of the things that we can do in the short term that will move us forward is to start to assemble land. So there are some additional funds beyond what we've shown up here that can help us start to buy land for the phase 2. That would be a really critical next step that would move us along that road.
Thanks. That's all I had.
Quick question for clarification, Jeb. The Corps of Engineers is doing a study, or did a preliminary study that showed, as you noted, the flood flow frequency levels and all that, and they're somewhat higher. What was the one that they did before that?
2000, I think 2002 or something like that.
Okay, and what was the one that was before that?
Oh, that'd probably be like 80, I guess 88 or 98, 88.
Okay, so in terms of, just so everybody understands, what's the difference in the height from 88 to 2000 whatever to these preliminary numbers that we've received? Is it a foot? Is it 2 feet that they're anticipating in terms of the height and the change in that level?
I can't remember off the top of my head at the Southeast 6 gauge what those additional heights, but as you know.
How about right out here?
Yeah. Again, the Southeast 6 gauge, it's been significant increases that we've had since the 88, and primarily there are 2 flooding events that impacted their statistical analysis. One would be the 93, and then also the 2008 storm that increased, essentially you look backwards to predict the future, and those 2 storms were large storms, and so that impacted what they did for their analysis. So yeah, they increased. I can't, it's maybe a foot or something. I don't know. I hate kind of just shooting off the top of my head, so I can't remember. But they were significant increases. I mean, they're not just like an inch or anything like that.
Well, they had increased Birdland, did they not? 2 feet?
I think it was a foot and a half is what we had to do up at Birdland from what they from what they had from the 2002 to the.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought they said 2 to 2.5 feet they had to add to that.
It's like a foot and a half.
Well, okay. At any rate, so a foot and a half, just based on what they did. All I'm trying to say is, is we look upstream in the conditions that have changed over time in terms of the amount of water that comes down the river during a high flow event. It's significantly more, and the velocity is more because of the way the fields are drained. 85% of it is rural ag, and the balance is developing other areas. I'm just concerned that, you know, not to beat a wet horse, but that we want to protect our assets, and this is where our assets are during an emergency. And 99.9% of the time, we're high and dry and perfect and whatever, and nobody really cares about spending extra money until that event and our resources are underwater. And on top of that, we want to protect Kemet, and we want to protect everybody else, because that's a great opportunity down there. Wide open area. We've removed a lot of stuff, all the junkyards, all that stuff that we've spent massive amounts of time, and as Rick pointed out, getting funding for the Southeast Connector. Great asset, great opportunity moving forward. I just, again, want to feel comfortable that we're protected during a time when we need our assets and we need access to our assets. And when we're filling sandbags with sand and gravel and whatever, I don't want to be in a situation where that's sitting underwater. All of us sitting at this table will be held responsible for that event, if it happens. Now, if some larger event that, you know, Armageddon or something happens that we have no control over, and say that we didn't, you know, plan to get there. But I think we've had thresholds that we put out from day one where we need to be on this, and I just think that we ought to make sure we achieve it.
Mayor, your caution about this is very appropriate. I don't think anybody can stand here and give you or anybody else 100% assurance about flooding in the future. We have done our very best to make this as flood resistant as we can. Pat Kazitsa just said to me, what was your number, Pat, that you?
We're about 5 foot higher than what we're located at right now. We've never flooded where we're at now. So it gives me a higher measure of confidence, even though based on the benchmark we have at our flag pole down here in Public Works now, we'll be a full 5 foot higher.
Perhaps not perfect, but much, much better than we are today.
All right. Anybody else have anything else?
Can I ask one quick question, and it has to do with the snow melt slab? I don't know enough about it, but it seems to me that if helps gets our crews out to serve our residents quicker, it's probably the only time we can do that. Is there any chance where there is a way that we could pay as we go on this? Is there any leftover funds in our snow removal budget where we could not bond for it and pay it because it has that benefit of getting out to our streets and neighborhoods quicker? I think we should do these kinds of add alternatives that are sustainable and benefit us financially in the long run. But there are also things that don't make a direct difference to our citizens.
Mr. Coleman, we'll be happy to look at that, and if it was the will of the council, I'm sure we could find the funds to do it. But what I'm not sure about, what I can't say to you with certainty that there would really be a noticeable difference in terms of our ability to get out and remove snow around the city, and whether or not we do this particular improvement of the snow melt. We'll take a look at that. You know, frankly, $55,000 or $56,000 on a $15 million project is probably something we could find a way to fund. We just didn't feel, in light of the project budget being the way it is, comfortable coming forward and saying that was an item that we thought we had to do. If our bids were really good, it's the reason we put it in there. We thought we could cover it. And as I stand here, I'm just not sure there's going to be a strong relationship between making this investment and serving the public any faster. We'll take another look at it today, though, and we'll let you know if we have a different opinion by the time of the council meeting tonight.
Just clarification on the other one that is not recommended. What is your anticipated usage if we're able to produce 250 kilowatts, does that meet what percentage of your usage? And I'm thinking during a time, remembering 93 when certain areas lost electricity, they lost water, they lost everything else, it would make citizens feel, I would guess, like we made an appropriate investment if this facility could continue running under those circumstances.
Well, as far as emergency services, there is an emergency generator as part of this facility, so we will have power in case of disruption of the grid. As far as utilization, I think maybe a better metric would be what would our anticipated dollar savings for energy. It's about $30,000 to $35,000 annually, so we'd anticipate to save on energy consumption if you had the photovoltaic system in.
All right, that didn't answer my question, answered your question.
Well, we don't anticipate it to be used for emergency backup power. You know, if power's out, sometimes that's snowstorms or rainstorms, and it might be at night. So as far as emergency backup, we're relying on a generator instead of the photovoltaic. If I think that's the question, as far as would we use that as far as emergency power redundancy.
Okay, so you really didn't think it had any use at all?
Well, primarily the use would be for reduction of the grid, of the electrical generation for energy, you know, make it more energy efficient. The goal of getting to a net zero building is sort of something we always look at, and it gets us closer to that as far as being more sustainable, but not strictly for emergency. It was more for energy consumption.
All right, thanks, Jeff. Anybody have anything else on this? Thank you, Mr. Manager. Let's now move to the Housing Services Update.
Mr. Mayor and council members, I want to just take a minute. We're running a little bit beyond our schedule here, so I'll try to do this fairly quickly. I think some of you have been involved, but not all of you, in our most recent challenges with respect to the Section 8 housing. Let me just give you a few talking points about this thing. It was touched on earlier this morning, but just as a frame of reference, we have about 3,000 Section 8 vouchers in our city. Within those 3,000 units that are provided through the Section 8 unit program, there are about 7,300 people that are served by that. 80% of the people of the units are located in the city of Des Moines, 20% outside the city. The average household income of the people served is about $11,000 per year. So it is a very significant program. What's happened most recently, I think many of you are aware, is that through the federal sequestration actions, the budget for the Section 8 admin has been cut once again. Just to give you an idea what it means for the fiscal years 13 and 14, so this year and next year, the projected deficit in the Section 8 administration is about $860,000. These deficits exist even though we have reduced the number of positions within that Section 8 administration by 9, and that has produced an additional savings beyond those numbers of $450,000. So we have done our work to try to reduce expenses, but despite that, these huge deficits are looming in front of us. Our reserves presently in the Section 8 program for administration are about $600,000. If you burn through all of those reserves, which of course is not in accordance with anybody's book in terms of how you fiscally manage an operation, but if you utilize all of those reserves, you would end up with an ending balance of about $260,000. So if you think about it, a little bit of a cushion at the end of fiscal year 14, you really need about $300,000 from where we project we are today in order to get through fiscal year 14 with the Section 8 program essentially intact. Now, late last Friday, we did get some good news. Doug Romig advised me that we have been the happy recipients of an IFA Home Investment Partnership grant. The good news there is that that particular program will generate about an additional $50,000, a one-time revenue. It's not ongoing, if I understand, one-time revenue. So that $50,000 could be available to offset that Section 8 admin cost, which brings that gap of $300,000 down to about $250,000. Now, based on a meeting that was held last Friday with the Polk County Housing.
For how long? Is that for 1 year?
Mr. Mayor, I think that's just a 1 year, we're talking just 1 year number. It's a one-time allocation of funding, right? Okay. So our gap is about $250,000. Based on the meeting that was held last Friday with Polk County Housing Trust, there was great conversation, I understand. Some of you can report on that better than I. That the county would be willing to split the shortcoming with us. So if that holds true, that $250,000 would have to be split equally between the city and Polk County. County would pick up $125,000. We would have to pick up $125,000. Now, just to put it in context, that's burning through all of the reserves, and that just gets us through the end of 2014. This is by no means a long-term solution. This is simply a Band-Aid that holds the Section 8 program intact through the end of 2014. My recommendation to you is, and we don't have very many great options for us to fund the $125,000 for fiscal year 14. That's our share of it. We did look at using CDBG dollars. I was advised last week that HUD has basically not okayed that particular approach. So we're not left with very many good options. One option is with our gaming revenues. We do or have received wonderful support from Polk County and Prairie Meadows in that particular program. Council's expressed direction in recent years has been to utilize that money for streets and bridges. The good news is that our revenues are up slightly such that we can maintain our commitment to streets and bridges at about the $6 million level. And there is sufficient excess revenue and gaming revenues that we could fund the $125,000 from that particular source of money. So on your agenda this evening is a recommendation to approve the housing services budget, but by necessity, we have to figure out a way to close that ending fund balance for FY14, and that means that we have to identify $250,000. Again, just to summarize, the county has indicated a willingness to do $125,000, and that would mean that we would have to do the other half of the $125,000. The last thing I want to say is this. This is not a long-term solution. We have to, in my judgment, commit ourselves to work not only with our own resources and our own staff, but with others in the community, notably Polk County or United Way or others, to see if we can find a long-term solution for this particular program. If we can't do that, then the future of the program is not very bright. And there are far too many people in this community that benefit from this program. And they are people in the community that are the most vulnerable to all kinds of challenges. And if the program isn't there, then we should all be concerned about their ability to have any kind of a decent life. So it's extremely important that we find a long-term solution. Unfortunately, we are looking at stopgap Band-Aid actions right now to hold us through 2014, but hopefully that should buy enough time for us to really sit down and commit some effort to finding a solution that is long-term and permanent and will allow the program to continue on. So.
Well, if you would clarify for anybody that is listening on this, when you say sustain the program, we're talking about, and I look at Doug back here, we're sustaining it at a level that we're going to be able to service at this point, what, 110 less families, even with all these fixes that you've outlined. So it's we're not sustaining it at current levels. We're reducing, and this is just to fix our end of it, right?
Mr. Mayor, you're absolutely correct. Based on the federal cuts, there were two kinds of cuts. One was the percentage of costs that we could recover for administrative purposes. That was reduced to 68.5%. Then, in addition, HUD reduced the number of Section 8 vouchers by 110 for that year. I'm looking to Doug to make sure I'm saying the right numbers. So, yes, you are absolutely correct. But if we don't at least take the action we're talking about now, I think that threatens the balance of the program, which is 3,000 units. So it's a huge number still out there. But you are correct, Mr. Mayor.
Christine?
I am very appreciative of all the discussion that's gone on and the assistance that we're getting to at least have a short-term gap to allow the program to go forward, because it does buy us the time to look at, what is the long-term solution. But I think it's important that we also send communication to all of our elected delegation, our congressional delegation, to say, this is what we've done, but you need to be here, and you need to understand the impacts of these cuts, what it's having, and you need to be a part of the solution with us at the table as we're having these discussions. And I know we talked about it when we were meeting, making this a priority when we're in Washington, D.C.
Those are terrific comments, and we'll do it. And I don't want to speak for the mayor, but I know one of the conversations he and I have had recently is working with our folks in Washington to make sure that we get an audience with HUD officials and our delegation on that very point. So in addition to letters, I think there is an opportunity to do some direct calls. Mayor, you may want to add or subtract to what I just said.
That's exactly correct. Anything else? Chris?
No, we do meet this afternoon, a subgroup of the Homeless Coordinating Council, to start looking at long-term answers. And given the way that Washington, D.C. has worked and played games, it scares the heck out of me that mid-year this year we might have more things to deal with. So I don't think that we have a year under our belt to sit back and relax. I think we need solutions long-term immediately. These vouchers help people. They also prop up our neighborhoods. There's 80% of these people live in the city of Des Moines in private residences. This isn't, public housing units that the city owns and manages. And we need to make sure that this program is strong and we have the funds to administer it. Because when you start doing a poor job administering it, that's when these units and these residents begin being a detriment to our neighborhoods as well. And this will just continue to spin in ways that is really bad for us as a community now made up of great neighborhoods.
All right. Mr. Manager, let's quickly move to the legislative update.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a handout for you. I'll just highlight a couple of items very quickly because I see we're well past our time this morning. Last week, of course, was the funnel week up at the Capitol, second funnel. And the good news is that a number of bills that we had concerns about went away. Only those bills that are still in Ways and Means government oversight and appropriations committees, plus leadership bills, are still alive if they haven't been through the funnel. Most importantly, that I want to highlight for you quickly is House File 184 on rental regulation related to residential occupancy. This was the bill that prohibited cities from regulating the occupancy of rental property based upon familial or non-familial relationships. That is, you couldn't use family as a basis to regulate. That bill did not survive the funnel. As council knows, a number of citizens as well as a number of council members went up to the Capitol. That's greatly appreciated. It was very positive. And excuse me, obviously their efforts worked because the bill failed to advance. Another bill that I want to draw to your attention under the Bills to Watch section of the handout is House Study Bill 216. That bill would expand the Office of Citizen Aids, which is formerly the Ombudsman, and the Iowa Public Information Board's powers. It would allow them to access closed session minutes of various city councils and local governments, as well as the audio recordings without a court order. This is a dramatic change. It would obviously have a chilling effect on your frank discussion of important items, from personnel issues to potentially property acquisition to pending litigation. When it comes to the pending litigation, frankly, I think it's a violation of attorney-client privilege. I don't think it's been thought through. We could probably use your help, and we'll get you out some bullet points that would help talking to legislators about this bill. The Attorney General did offer an amendment that would have provided some process and procedure rather than just carte blanche to the entities, but that was not passed. So something along those lines, and also exempting out items that are attorney-client privileged, because that would under current law, that would have the function of potentially obliterating the attorney-client privilege and make conversations that we have about pending litigation and items of concern no longer privileged and private.
Before you continue on, Mr. Attorney, I'm assuming this is would have some impact on some level of government other than state government?
State government would not be included. That's correct.
All right. So they want.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Always.
that's exactly what I was going to bring up.
So when they have closed meetings or caucus meetings or whatever, those are not subject to these same kind of rules.
That's correct.
Thank you.
The other items that I did want to let you know, too, that the strip club regulation, that's a very important home rule impetus up at the Capitol because the Supreme Court, frankly, misread the statute. Chief Justice Cady, in his dissent, called it an absurd reading. This bill would restore home rule powers. We don't currently use it in Des Moines, but it would be nice to have that tool in our arsenal. There was some concern about First Amendment issues. I think those have been addressed. Clearly, the bill would not authorize cities to engage in inappropriate, nor could it legally authorize cities to engage in inappropriate restriction of First Amendment rights and procedures, and we wouldn't recommend that in any event. That's a brief, condensed version of what's going on this morning, and we'll keep you apprised, as always, of other bills that come up.
Did you want to talk about the second page? Okay. All right. Anybody have any questions, council members? If not, let's open it up to any public comments or questions or requests for clarification. Anything? Seeing none, thank you all for attending, and see many of you again this evening. Thanks.
You touched off the
No.